MayDay in London. The forces of law and order prevail over the mob. We were warned of 1,000 hardcore anarchists attempting to bring violence and mayhem, how CS gas, rubber bullets, even police marksmen might be deployed. But in the end, our boys and girls in blue saw them off. There is, though, another interpretation of what happened on MayDay in London, how 1,000 hardcore clowns and pantomime dames came not to smash windows or plant bombs, but to crack jokes,
unify with the cosmos,
and play games. And that in doing so, they won the day by making the police and those they sought to protect look ridiculous. Britain's capital had battened down the hatches. Police intelligence forecast widespread violence. No chances were to be taken. And then at 6 a.m. we caught our first glimpse of the anarchic mob.
Ain't no power like the power of the people, 'cause the power of the people.
Yes, that's them, dancing around a womble. A bit of street theatre, a game. But then the whole event had been cast as a game. When police went to the South London squat where a few dozen activists had slept the night, they searched for weapons and found a version of the Monopoly board. Police intelligence insisted this was proof of a plot to bring widespread criminality to the capital. Every property close to a site on the board was a potential target. But the Monopoly literature was knowingly ambiguous. Rules? There are no rules, it said. There were more jokes than threats, with the authors reminding players, don't forget the power of humour.
There is a battle going on all sorts of levels, and a fight going on for people to recontrol their lives. And that battle is intense. It could be extremely violent, like Seattle. And out of Europe is coming this humorous, carnivalesque culture.
Looking at some of the MayDay Monopoly literature, it was very humorous. When I was walking around, somebody handed me a get-out-of-jail-free card, and that had all the information on what would happen if you got arrested.
The MayDay Monopoly leaflet, which had a little bit about all the different areas that are squares on a Monopoly board, and it was very well designed, very sort of wittily produced. And they're sort of designed to, and the police are trained, presumably, to sort of read this as if it's going to be this violent attack. The press copy this, so it's anarchists are targeting these areas, which sounds as if they're going to sort of turn up there with RPG-7 rockets and stuff.
Take the first scheduled event of the day, the critical mass bike ride. Having hyped up the threat of anarchy on our streets, this didn't quite fit the script. It looked more like the Amateur Dramatic Society's annual outing than an attempt to topple the state.
Well, the reason I'm at critical mass this morning is because there are too many cars on the road. There are too many people just using cars just out of sheer laziness or whatever. And as a result, there's children dying of asthma, there's pollution problems which are way out of control on this planet. And something needs to be done about it. There needs to be attention brought to it.
Personally, I'm fluffy, not spiky. I'm a fluffy terrorist, and rather than a spiky terrorist. I don't believe in violence. I'm only a terrorist because they've called me a terrorist, rather than being a terrorist because I install terror in any way.
Our form of disruption is completely humorous, and actually we get the support of, hundreds of thousands of people who actually see a carnival in the middle of Elephant and Castle. I think is an excellent idea.
The anti-capitalist movement has combined direct action with non-violence and come up with a form of protest that revels in turning things on their head.
This is great. This is we're on one of the main streets here, which is usually really, really crowded with cars, and there's a lot of bad smell of pollutants in the air. And here we are on our bikes, reclaiming the streets.
It's subversively peaceful, aggressively passive. Neither police nor press seem to quite know how to react to that contradiction.
there was an item on one of these sort of 24-hour news channels where they were reporting live all day from Oxford Circus here. Then they had someone over at Liverpool Street where the cycling demonstrators were, and in that earnest tone, and the newsreader said, well, reports have come through that the cycling demonstrators blocked the road for a while. And when you look at it, like King's Cross railway station was targeted in as much as they were planning to give away free veggie burgers. So it doesn't really sound like it was something that you need 6,000 police for.
We made it. It was a beautiful ride, really peaceful, just lots of nice, fun music, everyone smiling along the way. I mean, you saw yourselves, it was lovely.
.30. A rumoured attack on Buckingham Palace by militant anti-monarchists proved to be just that, a rumour. At another monopoly site, the Angel Islington, we were promised a sinister-sounding anti-capitalist action. In the event, it was one man's challenge to Rupert Murdoch. In Trafalgar Square, an animal rights event entitled Feed the Birds attracted scores of police, hundreds of pigeons, but no protesters. Oh, except one. Old Kent Road, the cheapest monopoly property, did attract a demo of sorts. But it began to look as though the whole morning's events were a giant practical joke being played at the police's expense.
Power Wombo! Well, it's to aid us in our demonstrations and hopefully to protect us from any nasties that we come across. So be warned, the Power Wombo is ready.
It's not easy to cast someone calling himself Uncle Bulgaria as an enemy of the state. And senior police officers' continued insistence that London was at risk of imminent attack from 1,000 vicious anarchists was proving difficult to sustain. But the joke only worked because of an implied threat. This was a black comedy, a bit of clowning with a dash of menace.
Well, let's get one thing straight here. They may label us anti-capitalists, but if anti-capitalist means that our children have got food in their stomachs and houses to sit in and an education system that's worthy, then I'll stand here any f***ing day and say that I'm an anti-capitalist, yeah? Let me tell the police here, we are not here for a violent confrontation with you, but let us tell you, if you f*** with us, we will not stand back, yeah? Okay? No, we are moving into central London and we do not want no trouble and no aggravation with the police. And despite all the shit in the media, we are free people and we are the future of our democratic society.
This is Dr. Diana, Hecate Major calling.
12 noon. Coutts Bank in the Strand. The monopoly literature promised a theatrical and humorous show. But with all that plate glass, was this to be the stage for the battle scene? No, it was a theatrical and humorous show involving a serious young man in a red nose. A protest against third world debt, this kind of event would normally be lucky to attract the attention of the local paper. It was street theatre, with the police dutifully playing their walk-on part.
It made the police look ridiculous. That is the harsh reality of yesterday. The police looked ridiculous 90% of the time.
Hanging around with all their gear
Hanging
on.
around with all their gear while people are enjoying themselves and singing and dancing.
Over at Oxford Circus, decreed as the main stage, another act in the drama. The critical mass cyclists turn up, and with the world's media breathlessly anticipating anarchic mayhem, they humour their audience by putting their bikes down.
Move on! Please! Can I encourage you to get up and move?
But once again, they're merely teasing the crowd. When an officer asks them to move on, that's exactly what they do. The cyclists headed off to Monopoly site Euston Road, but by now, pedal power was beginning to worry the police. The day was being played according to the protesters' script, and they needed to seize back the initiative. Officers encircled the cyclists and refused to let them go any further, invoking a section of the Criminal Justice Act that implied police anticipated violence.
We want out! We want out! We want out! We want out! Go on, go on! Go on!
How does holding us here actually, it's just frustrating people, and it's really alarming. I'm just a normal person coming out because I object to certain things about the way our society operates. And I really, really do object to being kept here. I mean, in effect, we're under arrest.
Go on! Go on!
It was a dangerous tactic because it risked making the protesters appear like victims and, by extension, casting the police as villains.
I just came down to London to do some research, actually, and I saw what was going on. I just followed the crowd. I thought it was quite interesting what's going on. And but frankly, I'm appalled by just the police's behaviour in this situation. They really seem to be turning this into a tinderbox situation when all it's been is peaceful protest all around. Nobody's been inciting violence or whatever.
Let us out!
After an hour and a half, the crowd was released, but as the day moved towards its central drama, the police risked looking like they'd lost the plot. The performance about to start, the actors move to their positions. But there are two scripts. In one, the police are the upholders of order and freedom. In the other, the activists are whistleblowers exposing wrongdoing in a pantomime frock. Both are intent on ending the day cast as the good guys.
It was a carnival-like atmosphere. We saw young girls dressed as fairies and women in mermaid outfits and girls carrying balloons and blowing bubbles, and it was this real carnival atmosphere. And what these people did, essentially, was they took our game, capitalism, and then they ridiculed it really publicly, but in a way that made all of us, kind of the viewer at home and the people who came and observed, realise that it was quite a funny game that we were all playing.
But ridiculing the system meant gently mocking the police. At 2 o'clock, senior officers took the upper hand. The afternoon's events were to be conducted on their terms. They seized control of the space. But when you imprison the clowns, you risk losing the sympathy of the audience. What we witnessed were two conflicting strategies for the afternoon. The police were employing military tactics. Their interest was in control of territory. But the protesters were employing propaganda tactics. Their concern was control of reputation. When the police blocked their way, they didn't respond by fighting, they replied by dancing. police approach was all about confining people, restraint. The protesters' response was a cheeky exhibition of anarchic disobedience.
Close in again.
It proved inevitable, though, that the policy of containment would lead to frustration and confrontation. When the trapped protesters attempted to break through the police lines, the waiting press were rewarded with the images that fitted their preordained script. Now the crowd was being cast as an unruly mob. They had dared to challenge authority. At last, with time enough before the evening news, here was the illustration of the hardcore anarchists we'd been told to fear.
The thing deteriorated over containing people in jail, an open jail. They were there, up in each other's faces, jumping and dancing, but not giving me enough space to do that. The police pushed them and then cornered them in, and then started to break it up by groups. Now that always leads to frustration and violence.
A mile away, another confrontation. Police blocked Lambeth Bridge, but were reluctant to explain why.
You are not coming through.
What legislation are you using to prevent us moving?
Commissioner's regulations.
Under what section of the legislation?
I'm not prepared to discuss this with you. You are not coming through.
Your taxes, all right? And you're not allowing us to tell us why you're preventing us free speech moving into the capital? Well, let me tell you something, sir. We're going to use the tube and we're going to Oxford Circus whether you like us or not.
As long as you pay for it.
Everybody is going to use the tube.
A second wave of protesters were making their way towards Oxford Street. But despite the hassle and the rain, many seemed determined to make MayDay fun.
We just want to stand here and have a good old party and dance around, you know? We just want to enjoy ourselves.
The game was still on. Its aim, to subvert through humour.
The enormous numbers of the people there that were sort of demonstrating, and you couldn't have been more sort of non-violently dressed, if that makes any sense. You know, people dressed as a copy of the Financial Times, for example. And there was a group dressed as Vikings. And it struck me, one of the newspaper reports was that the police thought there might be 6,000 anarchists swooping in from Europe, especially for the day. And I saw these Vikings, and I thought, wow, that's obviously how these 6,000 people swooped in. They are Vikings, and they came in longboats. That's clearly what happened.
At tea time, the long-awaited Wombles emerged, unchallenged stars of this rebellious performance. We'd been told to dread their coming, but what we saw was a cheeky caricature of the police, a slapstick version of the riot cop.
One newspaper actually used the phrase "tooled up," and then had where they have the big black dots and examples of the different tools that they're going to be tooled up with, and it was football shin guards. They were planning to wear football shin guards, white overalls, and earplugs. Tooled up with earplugs. They probably, if anyone had had furry ear muffs, they'd have gone, right, that must be the ringleader.
The Wombles model themselves on the Yabasta anarchists of Italy. In their grossly padded white overalls, their intention is to humiliate the state's protectors. Responding to mockery with a truncheon merely adds to the absurdity.
The good guys were the dancing guys. The good guys were the costume guys. And the bad guys wore the wrong costume because they looked like the bad guys. They had these helmets, like turned backwards, police behind them. You can't see them, pads all over them. And they looked frightening. And they brought a feeling of dread to that situation. While these guys who dancing and stuff, they look like guys, oh, these can't be the guys you're talking about who are going to wreck London.
But within the crowd, there were some who'd come to make trouble. The threat that gave life to the protesters' tricks was real. But the so-called spikies proved to be a small minority, including some who on closer examination didn't quite fit. Would a true anti-capitalist turn up for MayDay in a Nike jacket?
Give me it, I'll throw it.
No, this was predominantly a fluffy demo, to cast the crowd as a criminal horde thwarted from spreading carnage by the bravery of bobbies is unconvincing.
Reputation nowadays in the age of the logo is absolutely paramount. And what we saw was a group of people, the mob, instead of using violence as their weapon, using humour. And in that way, they didn't lose the moral high ground. And multinationals, the state, the police will find that much harder now to be able to ignore their concerns, and will feel that you know, how do you fight? How do you fight back? How do you defend yourself when you're not facing a smashed window?
How would Nike and Gap and they feel this morning that the only way they could operate is behind thousands of police officers dressed up in their most dread uniform, ready to go? How would you feel?
When the dust settles, the problem for the police and the corporations they sought to protect will be that they don't have a sense of humour. They cannot laugh at themselves. The protesters have identified that as the weakest point in the armour of the state, and exploiting it has an unexpected consequence. The harder the state hits the crowd, the more it hurts itself.
I've had my shins kicked, I've had bruises where I've put up against my face to stop the riot shields being swung against you. I've had truncheons aimed at my head, my cheek, my back, everything, even when you're standing with your back to them and they tell you to move and you can't move.
I think they treated people so badly and it was unnecessary. It was an overreaction to a situation that really wasn't there. It didn't look as though it was going to get violent. Nobody there was preaching violence. They didn't need to treat people in such a fashion. They do not have the right to confine 1,000 plus people for that amount of time just because they feel there is a mindless minority that may cause some problems. That's tarring everybody with the same brush. Most people were there to make a peaceful protest.
I feel at the end of it more determined than ever to carry on protesting and bringing the arguments out into the public domain, and I feel that at the end of the day we've got our message across. But I've got to tell you first of all that what we've seen today on the streets of London has been one of the most anti-democratic mass manoeuvres by the police I've ever seen in Britain.
Scotland Yard still stands by its policing of MayDay, saying their tactics were proportionate given the threat to people and property. They point out that after releasing the protesters from Oxford Circus, there were incidents of violence and serious criminality. 57 people were injured during the demonstration. Of those, 3 were police officers.
Overall, if I assess the demonstration, I would have said all that was predicted bit the dust. And there were areas of that demonstration in which the police were completely undermined. And I think they will take that into account and hopefully refashion their tactics.
I think their message actually has got through to a remarkable degree. There are people who I've spoken to since the protest, people who these issues really hadn't touched, who said, maybe I'll go next year to MayDay. It looked really good fun, and I think these issues actually seem to make quite a lot of sense.
The post-mortem of all this is that this enormous police presence, 6,000 people, all the talk that went beforehand, the aftermath is that it was all worth it, the hemming 1,500 people in for hours and hours, all worth it because there wasn't a riot. Even though all the people that were demonstrating said repeatedly there was not going to be. Thank goodness we were there, otherwise the riots that nobody wanted might have happened or something.